Oh, well, hello there. I guess this means we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, tech fans of all shapes and sorts and sizes and persuasions, welcome to another episode of the Monday Morning Tech Chat Show on the SGGQA podcast channel for a very special episode of the podcast, probably a little bit shorter of an episode for this week's podcast, as I am in a hotel room in India. I've made it to Delhi. I got in late this morning, which also just completely messed with my brain. You get on an airplane and it's roughly 13 hours of travel on one of those flights. But the thing that messes me up is it's nighttime when we had a layover in Montreal, and I say we, obviously a whole crew of tech bloggers are coming out to India to talk about MediaTek. MediaTek is doing something just a little bit different this year. It's not the same kind of summit that they've done in years past, but it's also just this intense acceleration. Like every year we see this radical acceleration for new chipsets and new phones. And I just recently started playing with the Xiaomi 14T, and we know that the Xiaomi 15 is right around the corner. So the tech companies are all trying to get ahead of the next model year. I've been talking about this like we talk about with cars. So you get a 2025 model year car and you can start buying that in like June of 2024. Same thing is happening with our phones now. But MediaTek is putting together just this trip. Our travel and accommodations have been covered by MediaTek, though it's not a direct sponsorship where they're paying for content. I'm really excited because when we get that FaceTime with MediaTek executives, they're often pretty candid. So last year I had an interview with two executives here at MediaTek, and they managed to correctly predict market trends based on things like Apple M series processors. And where Apple has now gone with the M4 and their plays on AI, they were correct. They were correct last year at what Apple would have to do. But I'm kind of putting cart before the horse here. A group of us flew out on the same flight. It was really lovely having kind of the West Coast contingent where I got to meet up again with Josh Vergara and with TK Bay, and we were on the same flight. You can always tell like. It is one of the reasons why I love spending time with them, because obviously tech creators and tech bloggers, we have to spend a lot of time chasing trends and chasing analytics. And like someone like Josh, I think does a very good job of balancing like this is a popular topic and this is a popular phone versus this is stuff that I just really like using. And I snuck this photo of him for all of the grandiose talk that so many other people have had about various tech products. It was just really cool. Like, we were flying in business class and Josh is just kicking back with a pair of face display glasses. And he's rocking the Evan Realities. I'm so mad. I'm so anxious about using the Evan Realities. And it's like, okay, these are precious. I'm gonna keep them here. These are my heads-up display glasses. I do not want anything to happen to them. I do not want them to get lost or broken. I especially don't want to lose them in another country. And so I left my G1s at home. And Josh rolls up and he's like, well, where are your G1s, man? So that's how you know Josh is a real one. On the flight, we've got like a nice little TV, but there was something else he wanted to watch, so he put on some X-Reels. And it's just so funny to me because we've tried to focus this conversation on these like high dollar exotic options, but I'm walking through I'm boarding an airplane, and in business class, I don't see anyone wearing an Oculus. I don't see anyone wearing an Apple Vision Pro, but me and Josh are wearing X-Reels. Like, I need to express, I'm going to be doing a video with TK, just like all of the different face displays that you can buy. It was a really, really, really lovely flight, and it means a lot when MediaTek is flying us out, and they splurge on business class for a number of us, because I am not fancy and I often do not treat myself to those kinds of experiences. But it does mess my brain up pretty bad. So we left in the evening and they served dinner on the flight, and then they wake us up to serve breakfast, and then a half hour after we're going to land, but it's 11 o'clock at night in Delhi. And that hurt my mind so much because like I had just had this breakfast food. I was so stupid. I asked for a cup of coffee, and so I'm drinking coffee at 11 o'clock at night, but my body thinks it's 8 a.m. And we make it to the hotel room, and I don't know what to do with myself. I'm really at a loss. So I got a little writing done, and I was able to, say good morning to Lex and Marie, and we had a lovely conversation. Just I had to miss her last softball game of the fall season, and that just broke my heart because they had like a little party after, and she'd really gotten close to these girls, and I was one of the sort of sub assistant coaches, and it just really is lovely to see how much these girls improve over the course of a season. Just like from like 7 to 9 year olds that are kind of like just lightly playing catch and they know how to run the bases and stuff, to the end of the season, like they're making the throw to first, and my daughter's behind home plate as a catcher, like making plays and trying to scare off people stealing bases and stuff. And I had to miss the last experience of that. But spring ball's right around the corner. It should be fine. It should be good. But we eventually get to the hotel, check in. It's like 1 a.m, and I'm talking to my wife and daughter, and it's like we're on the same clock. So then I don't know what to do. Like I'll try and pass out again, and I managed to take like a pretty solid executive power nap. Like I think I got a good 2 hours of just lights out, unconscious sleep, and then I was up like a shot. Like I was just wide awake. So I got a little writing done. I spent some time trying to set up the hotel workstation. I don't know, maybe I'll put a picture up of that if that makes sense for this. But just really trying to test some of this stuff because I'm not traveling as much as I used to. These conferences, it's interesting. I really appreciate those relationships that we build with certain PR companies. But we also have to be careful. Like too much time spent going from event to event to event means it's almost impossible to get the coverage of each event done. So I'm talking to TK, and I'm really excited to get a little hands-on and to have some of these conversations about MediaTek. I am a little behind already. So a number of the tech reviewers and tech blogs that are importing devices or get access to the Chinese launch on a lot of these products are already talking about Dimensity 9400 and Snapdragon 8 Gen 4. The companies that are going to be releasing phones in the United States are going to be way late in getting those global units out, and it's a precious conversation. Like point blank, we talk to some of these PR reps and we say things, like, I understand you want to get that really hot coverage in your region. You don't want the competition from other people. They have a humongous financial incentive to get early access to the products that the Western reviewers won't get until a little bit later. And I think in times past that used to make a lot more sense. But now, if there's any interest in talking about like a new Xiaomi, I'm recording this on my Vivo, what kind of benchmark performance conversation are people going to be interested in when this phone's already, like the X200 Pro has already been out for a while? And I know there's going to be a follow-up global launch, and I hope I'll be able to work with the folks at Vivo and get some coverage done. If not, my little USB light just died. So there's now a market shift in the video quality of this podcast. This was never going to be a high-quality podcast. That is such a bummer. I totally charged this before I flew out. I guess the battery's just dying on me here. But back to Vivos and stuff, like it's difficult to maintain the conversation. And I understand why PR companies do what they need to do, but it definitely makes the timing on this really delicate. And it's also like, for as we look to the end of 2024, we look to the beginning of 2025, I'm having a lot of conversations with content creators and with reviewers and with influencers, and we're all different breeds. But I think we're all recognizing sort of the changing audience dynamics and more so the changing platform dynamics, especially after just how awful the Google experience was trying to cover the Pixel at launch and what Google's third-party PR was trying to do with influencers was really disappointing. And I think it really spoke to a lot of us that there need to be some changes. There need to be, we need to adapt. And what we're trying to cover, it's interesting. Like the idea of a review has morphed and evolved over time. And I don't know that there's as much audience for here's the nuts and bolts practical demonstration, the claims from the manufacturer and the performance of the product, and does this gel with the audience's expectations, as much as I'm talking to larger blogs and larger outlets and saying things like, hey, if we want to do like a Gary Explains kind of a thing, and I'll say something like Gary Explains, and I had a content creator point blank look at me today, go, oh, Gary? I haven't heard that name in a while. And that really rocked me because Gary's still putting out consistent content. He's getting good traffic on his videos. And when he does a nuts and bolts explainer on different SoCs, he's one of the most reputable voices in the space. And I just talked to someone who, oh, I don't even check in with that techie stuff anymore. So when I reach out to larger publications and larger websites, it's really interesting getting the feedback that like, well, you pitched this article about smartphone cameras, but you didn't focus on the Pixel. That's the only phone that you would want to talk about for smartphone photography, right? And I was like, well, no, the article was about how the United States is falling behind the rest of the world. Well, yeah, and I see you talked about the Galaxy S20 and that you mentioned that the iPhone and the Pixel have these kinds of camera sensors, but where did you say that the Pixel was the best? And you're like, well, it's not. Oh, but I bought the Pixel because I like the Pixel. And you're like, that's your personal preference. That is not an objective statement on the quality of the Pixel's cameras. I'm rambling a bit here. So Dimensity 9400 is looking to me like it's going to be an incredible launch. It was last week. I tried poorly. If you go back to last week's podcast, there's a whole section where I'm trying to talk about different chipsets and the very early performance testing that we saw for Snapdragon 8 Elite. I keep wanting to say 8 Gen 4. When we look at all the publications saying like, oh, well, this Realme or this Redmi, it was Realme is overheating. What are we to do? Orion cores, and it's not living up to expectations. And oh, the performance per watt. And oh, larger batteries, 6,000 milliamp hour batteries. I'm shooting this now on the Vivo X100 Pro. The Vivo X100 Pro beat the Pixels to getting Android 15. But at launch, this Vivo was one of the first examples we got of this all big core design on the Dimensity 9300. And in that very first launch window, this phone ran a little hot. And this phone did not benchmark well for sustained performance. But over time, we've gotten numerous updates. Vivo has supported this phone very well in getting up to Android 15. We see a very different performance curve on this phone. And that's another thing that just kind of kills me when I talk to other reviewers. It's not going to bother me if I'm trying to talk to like my daughter's friends' parents at school, and right now it's Samsung, Google, or Apple, right? And not in that order. It's almost 70% iPhone, and then everyone else is squabbling over it's Samsung or Google for the remainder. So I'm not bothered when I hold up like, I use a OnePlus, and they look at me and say things like, well, okay, I mean, that's not an iPhone, so is that a Samsung OnePlus? And you're like, no, it's an Android phone, and it's a OnePlus. Oh, so like a Pixel? Like a Google phone? It's like, it is a Google phone, but it's the name of the company is OnePlus. No. Who's on second? That's where you got it wrong. So I've already lost my train of thought. I'm doing this completely without a net, without any like show notes or any listing or any links. This is just going to be sort of I wanted to check in and see how y'all were doing on a Monday. But it doesn't bother me that someone might not be aware of a OnePlus. But it does bother me when a tech reviewer looks at a OnePlus, uses it for a week when it's still under embargo and on pre-release software before it's had any polish, optimization, software updates, and they put out the review based on that experience. You guys have heard me prattle on about this stuff before. I soapbox about this a lot because we will cover the 0.1 decimal updates for a Galaxy, and we ad nauseum cover every single little aspect of the positive changes that you get on iPhone system updates. I mean, iPhone software is always perfect, except for the bug fixes that they put out, and then it's that Apple support is always the bestest. But I'm shooting this on a Vivo, and the experience has been phenomenal. And the software support has been much better than I was expecting for a fun touch-powered device. And I have similar experiences with Xiaomi and with OnePlus too. And it's just interesting to me that tech reviewers are the ones who tend to fall off. And it really does speak to the platforms that we publish content on, put pressure on us to always be monetizing at the peak popularity of every part of this conversation. And that's just not sustainable. That's just not humanly possible unless you turn everything into the simplest slice of the conversation that you can. You love talking about tech? Well, you got to niche that down. What kind of tech do you like talking about? You like talking about mobile tech? You can't just talk about all mobile. You got to niche that down. Your biggest videos are going to be about the most popular companies. And that's why, like, if I do a follow-up on the OnePlus 12, I doubt that's going to do huge traffic. The only way I can sneak that in is if it's like the comparison. Like right now, I could do a Xiaomi 14T Pro versus OnePlus 12 fight. And like, oh man, this thing has flat sides. And oh, this one has 3 cameras. And this 3 cameras is different. And like, that's so gimmicky. Where I would love to be able to just do a follow-up in the same year that the product arrives. It's disappointing to me that, like, if I want to do the follow-up video, it only seems to make sense when it's the my mouth just made a funny noise. I'm trying to say the remembrance of a popular phone. Yeah, something like that. Like if I want to go back and like, you know what I should do is go back and do a retrospective on my Galaxy Note 4, right? Still, I will heartily tell you to this camera right now, one of the best phones ever made in the history of smartphone manufacturing, and I still use one on almost every video that I make for my teleprompter software. But that's what we have to do. I can't just in the same year do follow-up videos on OnePlus because the effort to make videos is a bridge too far and YouTube isn't going to support that. So I end up with all of this effort for videos that get like 3,000 views. But I also can't not talk about the experience because that's like the whole point. It's like the only reason why I exist, because I'm not an influencer. Like y'all watching or listening to this right now, none of you care if I go on a fancy vacation. You're not following me because you just love seeing photos of me in business class. That's not what I share. That's not how I influence. And I feel like this is the kind of audience where, again, I'm preaching to the choir, but we like nerding out on things. And if there's nothing to nerd out on, then what do we talk about? How do we get back to these conversations? When I get my hands on a Dimensity 9400 and I run it through some benchmarks and I run it through some tests, it's not really going to be interesting content for YouTube. That's why my By the Benchmark series just lives on Patreon. So the only folks that I feel like consistently like to kind of dig through some of that conversation in a more practical sense. You know, the plug for the Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy, where I like to test real world apps, not benchmark apps. I am so sick of people batting Antutu scores back and forth, and look at where it got us. The Snapdragon 8 Elite needs some optimization. People who are buying the 8 Elite in the earliest days that they can get their hands on the phone are going to have a radically different experience than someone buying a phone powered by an 8 Elite in February. I mean, that's how fast it is. In 3.5 months, that's going to be a completely different phone. So who's going to go back to all the Realmes and the OnePlus 12 Chinese edition phone, OnePlus 13 Chinese editions, and go, oh, well, you see, now we see a market shift in this, and look at this performance and the battery life, and I'm going to redo all of my testing from the pre-embargo testing that I did to show you the real world ramifications of all this. If there was a Samsung label on it, they'd be tripping over themselves to talk about how improved it is. Look, and One UI, and it does all this, and it's just so great. And oh, my mind was blown. I was skeptical, but Samsung has won me over again by pure merit and my earnest opinions. But we don't do that for anyone else. I take a drink of water here, and we can get on to some other stuff. So I'm here to talk about MediaTek. I am skeptical that we're going to see any big announcements. My hope, my dream was to see a follow-up announcement for Companion. I really wanted to see a new tablet-y, Chromebook-y, low-power processor. An SoC to go after Celerons and like the lower end of Core i3s, the student-grade machines, the low-cost, home computers, but on ARM. I was really hoping that MediaTek was going to use this as an opportunity to attack the complete opposite side of the market that Qualcomm is occupying right now with the Snapdragon X series, X Plus and X Elite. We need an option below that. A computer that might cost someone $300 to $400. The Chromebooks, the student Windows machines. My daughter's Asus laptop, I believe, is some variant of a former, I don't think it's an N2000, but it's one of those that would have been badged a Celeron in the past. But it's running Ubuntu. It's just a full-fledged corporate Ubuntu laptop. And that thing is a screamer for being such a low-power PC. She's kind of spoiled, right? Like, she's got a full-fledged operating system, pulling up web browsers, playing little web games with her school friends, and then it's just pre-installed with, it's got Audacity on there, it's got GIMP. It's not called GIMP. It's new, the full, they spell it out in the little app tray, New Image Media Processing. I forget what GIMP stands for. Someone's going to correct me and everyone's going to make fun of me in the comments. I'm on 2 hours of sleep right now and I'm completely discombobulated. But it also has Shotcut. It's got Blender. So again, it's like this ultra low cost, low performance piece of hardware, but it's in an operating system environment where, yeah, it's not nice and it's not gonna fly, but she can do work in Blender on her student-issued laptop. And I just don't feel that similar hardware would work as well or as nicely or perform as well if it were running Windows 11. I feel like then it becomes a more expensive proposition. So again, short story, incredibly long, that's what I was hoping. MediaTek, because other companies wanted to get phones out, because phone manufacturers wanted to get ahead, especially get ahead of Samsung, and already put pressure on Apple, right? There's that weird half-year carryover where the iPhone starts by competing against phones that were launched at the beginning of the year, and then it has to spend a little time competing against phones that are launched the following year. But now manufacturers like Oppo and Vivo and Xiaomi are putting increasing pressure on, okay, well, you launched this iPhone, and in the same year, you're going to have to face more competition. And by the end of that year, the next iPhone is out, and then the following year phones are right around the corner. So it puts Apple in this weird, it kind of puts them on the back step. Obviously, the performance on an iPhone is going to be hugely competitive, and we can find all the benchmarks we want to verify iPhones are the mostest powerfulest. But the performance per watt conversation is now at a degree where the average consumers probably can't notice those differences, and Androids are coming in with significantly larger batteries, except for Samsung and Google, and Androids are coming up with phenomenally fast charging, except for Samsung and except for Google. And so I really feel like that's covered. This is what I was trying to articulate last week, and I did so very inelegantly. Like I'm doing it so elegantly now, but I've had a little more time to think about it. 8 Elite is a transition year for Qualcomm, and I think they're gonna manage that transition well. I think 8 Elite is gonna be an off step by moving from ARM reference design cores to the Orion cores that are in laptops. You're taking a chip, you're taking a processor, a CPU design, that was originally made for servers, and then they put it in laptops, and now they're shrinking it and putting it in phones. This is their first big all-core design, and I don't think it's going to be Qualcomm at their best, but I think it is going to end up being better than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 and the Snapdragon 888. The Samsung-made chips, I don't think we have that much to worry about. I don't think it's going to be that off of a year. But even when you talk about, oh, well, they're winning all this Geekbench and they're winning these Antutus, this is a refinement year for MediaTek. And this is why competition is interesting. Google, the rumor right now is Google is looking at an SoC design that they can keep as inexpensive as possible so that this chip can go in the A series phones all the way up to their Pro XL series phones. The chip is a constant. I don't know that I agree with putting $1,100 phones out there that have reasonably similar performance to like $400 phones. But Google is doing something interesting by putting a dollar cap on their SoC. So we know that Tensor is likely always going to underperform MediaTek and Samsung and Qualcomm. That's interesting. Then we've got the direct head-to-head battle between Qualcomm and MediaTek, and those prices are climbing higher and higher, but there's still a price advantage with the Dimensity. So when we start looking at price to performance per watt, that's where I think we've got the strongest argument for what MediaTek is trying to accomplish. So again, it's not like there's any grand embargo or big reveal from the event that we're going to be doing this week, but really for me, what it's going to be about is trying to get that hands-on time and to try and get some more candid quotes out of these executives. It really tickled my nerddom in my brain when I started getting these very on-point and practical conversations about things like AI performance. Because last year we were still floating this topic of like generative AI and ray tracing in video games, but from the SoC manufacturer, they're not responsible for all the services and the apps and like the skins that go on our phones and all the photo editing software and stuff like that. They're putting out the machinery that runs those experiences. And even from their perspective, we're having these conversations with consumers, and I think MediaTek is just starting to try and get ahead, and they're being a bit more active in their part of the process, saying this is what we provide, and when your phone does this, that was powered by MediaTek. Because right now, the Google experience, the Apple experience, I don't feel they're very well described. I feel they're really confusing, where a consumer is going to pick up their phone and do something with their phone, but maybe it was done in the cloud. Maybe it was done on the phone. Maybe it was done up in the cloud. Who even knows? Who even knows if AI is a thing on your phone or if AI is up in the cloud? So if you're going to put really powerful on-device NPU hardware in a phone, the company making the NPU is now getting a bit more anxious, describing this is the thing that our phone did. This is what our hardware contributed to that experience. That's what I'm hoping to get a bit more of. I just loved what they had to say about Apple last year. So I'll be curious to see what they have to say this year, because I feel it validated a lot of what happened last year. All of the people out there, think of all the tech reviewers that started making fun of Android phones that have like 16 gigabytes of RAM. Who even needs the 16 gigabytes? And AI is so amazing, but who needs more RAM? And like, think back to the OnePlus 12. There's the Chinese edition that had 20 gig of RAM. Come on, it must be a gimmick. Well, when you unpack really big Gen AI models, it's not a gimmick. You really do need a lot of RAM to make that stuff happen. So that seems to be what the big focus is going to be. It would make me so happy if we got a Companion announcement. I just don't think it's going to be very likely. I think that's one of the things that, like, you look at OnePlus put out a Dimensity powered tablet, and it's such a good tablet. And that Dimensity 9000 is just a beast, a performance per watt monster. And then Samsung, to try and get out of some of their financial woes, you know, putting a Dimensity 9300 in a tablet is not a compromise against a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. That is such a good fight. This is the competition that makes me so excited. It's like why mobile has been so much more exciting than Intel versus AMD. Because right now AMD is just slapping Intel around, and it's not close, and it's so embarrassing. But right now, MediaTek and Qualcomm are putting out some of the best work they've ever done in the mobile space, and those chips are now directly being compared. Qualcomm went out on stage and put out bar graphs. Look, here's our phone chip against Intel's most expensive laptop chip. And yes, the laptop chip is going to win in an outright but what about a performance per watt showdown? And if we match the power draw, well, isn't this interesting? And to put that in a tablet where you've got more surface area, you've got a bigger battery, that Dimensity is just chef's kiss. I mean, I've got a Dimensity right here in the Xiaomi, and it is such a monster. It is such a good performer. So I would love to hear them say something more about Companion, but I wonder if we're not getting to that place where maybe we just need to work on Chrome OS. Chrome OS is already kind of morphing into the backbone of a more Android-like environment anyway, and maybe we start really looking at the environment for Windows to just say, maybe it just needs to be a Dimensity. Maybe we don't need to have a Companion product and a Dimensity product. Maybe it's just the phone that's in, the chip that's in this phone, just pluck it out and drop it into something with a screen and a hinge and a keyboard, and it's gonna be good. It's gonna be a good mid-range, nice computing experience. It's gonna be more powerful than the chip that's in my daughter's laptop. If it's running Chrome OS, can you imagine the performance that you would get on a nice machine like that? So again, I feel like this is just one of those changing areas where we haven't heard a lot of news yet. But I also think this could be really, it's really, I'm trying not to just say everything is interesting. That's really interesting that Qualcomm's doing this. It's really interesting that MediaTek's doing that. I'm running out of words to describe things, and synonyms are hard. It's fascinating. Already lost the thread of what I was gonna transition to, but from Snapdragon X Elite now into MediaTek, it's interesting. There's this narrow window. Qualcomm had this exclusivity for Windows machines, but it ends in 2024. And I wonder if the exclusivity was also on a marketing side too. So maybe it wasn't just we're only using Qualcomm chips in these products, but it's also we're under these kinds of NDAs and this kind of confidentiality agreements, and you can't even talk about a laptop or a desktop play until 2025. Because we're pretty confident NVIDIA is gonna make some kind of play in 2025. In late 2025, I will be shocked if there's not some kind of consumer-facing NVIDIA chip. And this is really delicate territory for NVIDIA because AMD has just been steamrollering them for consoles, for mini handheld gaming devices. This is their opportunity to come back and say, like, yes, you could do a Steam Deck, but we have an ARM chip that's going to do this and going to give you that, and with an NVIDIA GPU. We've got RTX in this portable handheld. But again, you would think that's something NVIDIA would try and get out ahead of and start saying like, hey, we're playing with this and we're going to get developers on board and we're going to work on, emulation and getting proper AAA gaming support for this chip, just like we did. Remember NVIDIA Shield? And remember our NVIDIA handheld consoles that were some of the first that actually brought AAA gaming to Android. We're going to do that now. And if we know that NVIDIA is likely to make some kind of play in that space, AMD has to be investigating some kind of opportunity from them also. So where would MediaTek be? And I don't think MediaTek's play would be, let's go attack the most expensive high end. I think MediaTek's play would be, let's get in as many devices as we possibly can, and let's really make a consumer relevant play in this space. That's what makes the most sense to me. So we're going to have a lot to talk. I'm probably going to be sharing mostly on social media. I'm going to be trying to write up some of the announcements and some of the stuff. I don't think there's going to be anything so news, groundbreaking, you've never heard, oh my gosh, this just blew your mind. But again, I want to be hanging out with TK and with Josh and sharing some of our thoughts and then really following up on what MediaTek side of the conversation is. Because they've got goals. Like they've really been making inroads in some very strong plays recently. And it just makes a lot of sense to kind of take them at their word because they've been delivering. Every single time I come to one of these events and they're like, well, we want to make this and we want to do this. And well, we kind of think there's like a gap in the market where Apple and Qualcomm aren't doing this. And then a year later, like a Dimensity 9000 drops and it's so good. It's incredible. So lots to follow up on there. I probably should start winding this up because I should take a nap. I don't want to. I'm going to see if I can power through and then just be miserable and exhausted and then go to bed and then crash hard because we have a full day of coverage that we're going to have to chew through tomorrow. But I needed to take a little time to address some politics. We took a pretty bad beat last week here in the United States, and it really shut me down. Like the day before the election, I was anxious, but I was hopeful. I was hopeful that the citizens of the United States would come out and would support a more rational candidate. And that did not come to pass. I went someplace pretty dark. And I'm really glad that I didn't try to jump right on to doing a video, because it would have been a really bad video. I mean, it's going to be difficult for me to not get a little worked up and a little emotional just having this conversation in a hotel room in India with you right now. But I'm pretty confident it's going to get pretty bad. Over the last several months, I've been trying to talk about stories that I think are more consumer relevant than the coverage that they're getting. Specifically, I've been trying to highlight the work being done at the FTC and the FCC and the lawsuits that are being brought by states' attorneys general, and the DOJ. I think these are all of the paths that we need to walk to improve the situations that we're facing here in the United States. When we talk about massive big data corporations, they really don't have any guardrails. We can see that very clearly in how we're treating this AI play. They can do all of the damage to the environment that they want. And they're also getting billions of dollars in taxpayer funds to help subsidize the creation of new chips that will run data centers. They're getting sweetheart deals on zoning and tax breaks. And then they're also kind of starting to dig into water rights in ways that I think consumers should be concerned about. I was spending all this time talking about AI, and the AI that I'm interested in is the stuff that will run locally on a phone, not the stuff that goes up to the cloud and goes to a massive data center and takes 4 times more electricity to give you a terrible result than what we used to get from traditional search. And then listening to guys like Sam Altman go out there and say, well, I'm really being held back. I mean, we could have really gooder AI if I could just like triple the energy draw. Like that's like evil Bond villain stuff, dude. That's not feasible. And this is not a sustainable business model. And I really worry that this stuff is going to crater a big chunk of the economy. Basically how rich people relate to themselves and how billionaires pat themselves on the back. So the reason why I'm so disappointed in Americans is because it seems like the idea or the messaging to get out what we would think is good work just doesn't really exist anymore. It took us 3 years to fill all of the positions at the FCC so that we didn't have gridlock. We didn't have a deadlock vote. So we only got 1 year of the FCC being functional and being able to move on consumer initiatives. And we're also exhausted by politics that no one seemed to care. No one seemed to care that we didn't fill that position sooner. And we started working on net neutrality, and now net neutrality is tied up in the courts. But you know what? They'll probably sit on it for a couple months and then wait for this changeover in power. And what's going to happen to the FCC after the Trump administration is installed. We've been seeing such incredible work by the FTC that's already being challenged in the courts. And I want to reach out to people and say, hey, don't you hate it when subscriptions are hard to cancel? Well, on this podcast, we talked about the click to cancel rule. It's got to be as easy to cancel a subscription as it was to start a subscription. And you say that to anyone out there and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, I always hate it when like can't cancel my gym membership. But America voted against that. And that's the kind of rule that can be sort of overturned, this ping pong match. Oh, liberals are in power. I guess they're going to, those tax and spendocrats. But you missed all the stuff that actually does separate the two political parties and makes a difference in what we're trying to achieve. We're going to go back to an FCC that doesn't care about broadband distribution. Is probably just going to roll over for the wireless industry and let them redraw their maps again. So we won't even know who doesn't have access to reliable internet broadband coverage. We don't know. We've only just started to try and rework that. The FCC is having to do it themselves because for years and years and years, we've just relied on the wireless industry to self-report, and that hasn't been accurate. Net neutrality is probably going to go down in flames, and then again, you're going to have stupid, ignorant individuals saying things like, oh, well, the internet still works. You pulled the plug on net neutrality, and I still went to TikTok. And that's not what we're worried about. That's not what net neutrality is. And it's frustrating because I think the people that do care about this stuff have been exhausted by it. We've been burning them out because we keep batting this ball, this ping pong ball back and forth. But it's like if we don't fight for it every single time, well, we only need one person, the whim of one political party for us to lose it. So then we have to fight for it again. But that fight takes years to pull off. But as soon as we stop fighting for it, we're going to lose it again. Time and time and time and time and time again. We're not going to be spending as much money on reaching individuals who are disadvantaged or have issues with connections or can't afford broadband. So you'll never hear from the people in our population that genuinely need help. People like me are not the right message carriers. The people that you need to hear from are the people that you never do, that aren't participating in a 21st century economy, that don't have access to good, reliable data connections, communications equipment, education, entertainment. They're just irrelevant people. And we keep trying to fix that, but then we only get a couple years of total government gridlock to try and nudge this movement a baby step. And then if the political winds shift to the other side, all of that work gets kicked down the hill again. It's almost a Greek tragedy. It's Sisyphus, only with broadband. And like I said a couple months ago on this podcast, I'm tired of trying to come at this sideways, of trying to convince people that are generally comfortable and don't have as many issues with these policies and these practices, but I still need them to care. See, the thing that sucks is like, hey, if you get after these initiatives, your stuff gets a little better too. You get after, broadband distribution, and you get after, zoning laws, and you get after fiber to home. This gets better for you too. And I'm trying to be magnanimous, and I'm trying not to like ruffle feathers and stuff, but it's one side of the political process that is constantly in opposition to actual practical consumer improvements. Look at an experiment like Chattanooga in Tennessee. The broadband there, I think they now offer a 10 gigabit fiber to home plan, or might just be fiber to business. But still, they got a little nudge of cash from the Department of Energy. They set up their own co-op. It's paid through the power company. And they've got one of the most competitive markets for broadband distribution in the United States. It's one of the best platforms. You talk to people like, hey, do you like your internet service? It's like one of the only times people will say, yes, I love it. Because no one likes Comcast and no one likes Spectrum. And everybody hates dealing with AT&T and Verizon consumer lock-in policies. And then you go to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they're like, oh man, this is awesome. And it's so successful that the conservatives in Tennessee prevented it from leaving Chattanooga. Everybody loved it. Well, no, but it's bad. It's bad for other companies, so no one else in Tennessee can have it. And that's what we're up against. Is that they'll to your face say things like, well, we need a Broadband Consumer Choice Act. And then when you read the bill, it's how to eliminate consumer choices. And it's consistently on one side of the aisle. If you want fair metering for your data and services, and you support net neutrality, there's one side of the aisle that is trying to move the needle on this, and there's the other side of the aisle that is just obstinate and is trying to work against it because it's better for a handful of corporations and a handful of billionaires, and it hurts everybody else. I'm trying not to delve into all of the other issues that I feel might arise from a Trump presidency, but the ones that, as a techie and a nerd, that I've been trying to share good information on, it's important that we rein in the practices of big data companies. It's important that we look at the behavior of platforms and social media. And unfortunately, I just don't see where we're gonna have good talent in place with this incoming administration to make positive changes that help consumers and help citizens as much as they'll just trot out Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and say, whoa, these guys are doing great. That's the economy. When everybody you talk to is miserable using those guys' products, right? It's gonna get dark. This is the part where I'm supposed to rally and say, hey guys, you keep up the good fight and I'm gonna be right there with you. And right now, I'm tired. And I'm tired of trying to convince people to look at data that would be better for their own interests. And I'm so tired of trying to lead horses to water knowing they're going to refuse to drink. And I just need to take a break. Where my podcast regularly starts off with politics stories, I feel as we get through the next couple of months and we see a peaceful transition of power, likely none of the riots that we saw during the last transfer of administrative power. Who even knows? Because people are going crazy right now and the tempers are really, really high. And I think there's a lot of angst out there. I can't even say, oh, my side's better than yours. Like, watch them prove me wrong again when we do get to the next changeover in presidential politics. But I think we were kind of shown how much apathy, how exhausted people are. And like, this fight mattered. And it's not enough just to like, oh, well, the candidate wasn't good enough. In general, I really feel like the Democrats did a horrible job of putting together a platform and a coalition and getting boots on the ground to drum up the interest in the probably not gonna vote demographic of American politics. But also, I'm tired of trying to appeal to people who don't contribute to the process. These non-contributing zeros. I couldn't be motivated to look out for my own interests and things that would be better for me. And I'm getting pretty dark and I'm getting kind of ugly. And this is exactly why I didn't want to do this podcast immediately after the election results were in. But I'm not quite sure how to handle my own business. I'm not quite sure what to do with my own coverage. I'm not entirely sure I really am contributing to conversations with any substance that will help move the needle on some of these topics. And this isn't the plea to like, oh, well, make sure you say nice things about me, drop me those comments and tell me I'm doing a great job, guys. It's not that. It's that over the last 10 years, we've seen tech in general as a topic of conversation just completely deflate. And I miss when this stuff was a lot more interesting and it was a lot more exciting and consumers were interested. People, regular people, the regular average consumers would line up for a new phone release, would line up for a midnight launch of Windows 98, would line up for a video game that was coming out. And so many of those experiences and shared and communal, and we cared about the thing, and that meant we cared about each other because we were a part of the same thing. And it just seems like so many of those opportunities have evaporated. That relationship, the good vibes have kind of eroded. So I want to contribute, and I think that's what burns. I want to feel like God, this is so naive, right? I feel like such a kid saying something like this, but I want to feel like I'm making a difference. And I don't know that what I'm doing right now is making a difference. That's gross in my mouth to say something like that, because I put a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of effort and energy into trying to host these conversations, and the why of it becomes a very important question to ask. So I don't have any answers. I don't know what makes this stuff better. I think a lot of this stuff is just going to be taken out of our hands over these next 4 years. We just know it's going to get bad. It's going to get real dark. This is going to get ugly. So keep our heads down. Play hardcore defense. I don't know. Like, that's not a satisfying answer, and I don't have anything better. So stay tuned. The long and short of it is, I still am going to run a wacky little YouTube channel talking about gadgets and megapixels and giggle flips and all of the phones and performance and gaming and photography and stuff like that. And I'm still talking to a couple other outlets about maybe trying to freelance or do some editorials or maybe bring some technical analysis to tech blogs that don't want to get too technical. But I don't know. I think unfortunately, when you see me over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see someone who is going through the motions and is desperate to try and figure out what the world means to us today. And there aren't going to be any conclusive answers there. So now I'm just rambling. So thank you for tuning in. This week is going to be MediaTek. That's going to be so much more fun and a lot more interesting to talk about as we get into the silicon that's going to be powering the next year of devices. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be very upset with coverage that stops after this next week. Oh, Snapdragon 8 Elite is all done, and that's all that we had to say about it was this Antutu score. So don't do that. Find opportunities to contribute to conversations, and when you start playing with phones that have some of these newer processors and GPUs in them, talk about them. Like, don't let that opportunity go. I think Threads is a dumpster fire already, and Blue Sky will probably become kind of crappy too. But seek out the nerds that are talking about this stuff and talk about it. Because I think that's the thing that kills me is like so much of this weight and so much of this baggage only serves to separate us from our pals. It just becomes this like echo chamber of I'm trying to monetize on Threads, so I don't know, y'all, what do you think about this thing? Question that is just engagement bait. And that's all just noise. And that gets in our way. And then we really aren't talking to each other. And I do a lot of it too because I'm trying to promote videos and I'm trying to promote articles and I want people to read my stuff and watch my stuff and I'm posting them to specific places. So unfortunately, you might need to leave Blue Sky to see a video on YouTube. But at the end of that, I'm not getting questions. We're not talking about it. I put out a video and people won't even watch the video and then attack me for my opinions on the video that they didn't watch. That's the platform's doing. That's the influence from a platform that ratchets people up on headlines. So let's not do that. And then maybe we'll be a little happier as we watch a bunch of things that might become catastrophes over the next 4 years. So stay tuned. That was supposed to be my wrap up, right? I was supposed to be exiting, I was supposed to be exiting the freeway on that. MediaTek coverage this week. I've got some videos coming out to the channel. I've got an awesome little Panasonic laptop that I want to talk about. We're finally going to publish the public version of the video about how Apple scammed my grandma. Still super pissed off with Apple and the geniuses at the Apple stores that preyed on a little old lady trying to fix her iPad. And then I've got some other stuff coming out too. So you can catch some of the videos that I've just recently put out. I'm going to be doing a breakdown on my workstation setup, my Surface laptop and my Zebec monitors and the Asus portable router. It's all in operation right now. I'm using the new little Saramonic. I've got the CookTech as a battery backup. It's like a little portable UPS from my laptop, which is pretty rad. This is like really cool getting to put every piece together, and it's so small, like laptops and monitors and router and batteries, and it's like this could all fit in a backpack and unfurl itself into a full-on workstation grade environment. I'm really excited to share those kinds of experiences too. So I hope everybody out there is having a wonderful week. I hope you've had a lovely weekend. I hope this next week for you is amazing. I want you to do awesome with your technology. I want you to be awesome with your technology. And I'll catch you back next week for a proper in-office. We'll be back in the Gadget Lab, interactive. I'll be fielding questions and maybe make it a bit more of a Q&A because we haven't done a proper like pajama podcast in a while. And something tells me I'm going to be exhausted coming back for that next week's show because I've got a flight from India back to California. So it'll be Loopy Juan. And that's always a fun show, right, folks? So stay tuned. Be well, take care of yourself so you can keep taking care of others and be the amazing tech neighbors I know you can be. I love you all. I'll catch you back. Be well.